Okay, let's get into the mood.
Do we need one of these to watch this?
Hi, everybody. Let me start by asking a question. How many of you have occasion to climb a tower? Okay, keep your hand up. How many of you own a tower? How many of you participate in tower-related help, be ground crew, assistance? Okay, so I think what I'm going to talk about is relevant to a large number of you, right? This topic of safety around ham radio towers has been bubbling along for years. We hear about injuries, we hear about an occasional fatality. We hear a little bit about what's safe to do and what's not safe to do. I got very interested in this topic when I heard a year ago in October that we lost a fellow, Reverend Paul Bittner. He lived in Wisconsin. He has a big contest station with many towers, not just 2 or 4 or 10, something like 30 or 40. And he worked on these towers regularly. He had help. I mean, there's a lot of maintenance to do on that many towers. So he was very active. And last year, something failed, and he fell and lost his life. And then in July of this year, I heard again about another fatality. And this was this gentleman, Joe, in New Hampshire, who passed away when he was working with a friend. It was the friend's tower, Mike K1IR, and they were taking down this tower. It was about 40 feet of Roan 25, I believe, and the tower fell while at the last, at the last part of the operation where they were removing guy wires. So I thought, hey, 2 fatalities in one year, less than a year. And I started to wonder whether this was something that we should be expecting, or was this out of the ordinary? What kind of do we have a problem? So I sent an email to 2 in 12 months. So I sent an email out to the Yankee Clipper Contest Club email reflector, a lot of tower climbers, a lot of people who would be sensitive to this, and said, hey guys, do we have a problem? Should we be looking into this? Should we be thinking about more than just this most recent occurrence that happened in New Hampshire, or looking at this more broadly? Do we have a kind of a systemic problem in amateur radio around tower climbing? And I got an email back from my friend Dennis, W1UE, who is the president of the club. He said, good question, why don't you do a presentation on the topic? Okay, so, I thought about his question, and it didn't take very long to go over the idea of whether saving lives was an important thing to invest some energy in, and I came up with the answer of yes, of course I'll do it. So, in doing an analysis like this, I would always try to figure out a framework, an approach that makes sense for studying whatever the project is. And this is what I came up with. First of all, we would obviously recognize that anybody who loses their life while working on their tower, it's a serious problem. But the question is it big? Is it systemic? Is it more frequent than we should expect? We need to make a determination on that first. The second thing is, if it is significant, can we determine whether there are some root causes, some things that are common across all of what's going on that we can identify and perhaps do something about? And then finally, if there are, what can we do? Okay, so this presentation is pretty much broken up into these 3 pieces, and I'll go through them with you. All right, so another thing that's important to do is make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel. It turns out that in 2012, PBS Frontline and an organization called ProPublica, which is a internet-based investigative journalism kind of group, got together and they looked at a suspicious situation in the commercial tower climbing business, which was around the same problem. There was a suspicion that there were excessive numbers of fatalities in that business. It turned out that there were problems and things that could be addressed, problems that could be addressed. But what I found was that there were other things that I learned after looking at this. One being that there's a lot of data available and that we could use the data to analyze and compare. I noticed that they had already determined some potential root causes for the problems that they were having. I also found that government has a role. Of course, we're talking about commercial and occupational world versus the amateur at home in your own backyard world. But there's certainly things that we can learn. And then finally, industry, and there are standards. So there's a whole bunch that we could learn from what's already going on in the commercial world. Let me talk about this government part of things a little bit. In the commercial world, we have the U.S. Department of Labor, which handles all things related to occupational stuff. There are underneath the Department of Labor, there's OSHA. You guys have heard of OSHA. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and they have two big functions that we care about here. One is setting standards that are mandatory standards, that in the workplace you've got to follow these rules that have to do with staying safe. And second, when things do go wrong, they do investigations. They figure out what happened, and then they make changes to the standards to help improve the situation going forward. Okay. Another group under Department of Labor is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They count things. They count all kinds of things. They look at, they have a big matrix of occupations in the United States, and they track the number of workers, they track the geography, where are these workers located, they track how much people get paid, all of those kinds of things. But they also work with OSHA, and they take the data on fatalities and injuries, and they map it against the information they have about the number of workers and where they're located and that sort of thing, and they come up with this thing called the Census of Fatal Occupational Injuries, and we'll talk about that in a second. The last thing I want to talk about is it's not just OSHA that has the standard setting side of things, but there's also American National Standards Institute, which also does standards, and there's overlap, and in fact the ANSI standards are more detailed, more helpful than the OSHA standards in the area of safety around climbing and heights, working at heights. Okay, this thing called the Occupational CFOI, the Census of Fatal and Occupational Injuries. Basically, the number of workers and all that information is collected, and what they do is they calculate fatality rates for all these different occupations. And in order to compare them, what they do is they normalize them to fatalities per 100,000 workers in that particular occupation. So to give you an example, if we have an occupation that has 1 million workers and we have 10 fatalities per year, to get what's the normalized number? It's going to be 1 fatality per 100,000 workers, because you have to divide by 10 the number of workers and the fatalities to get to that ratio. Okay? And similarly, if it's a small number of estimated workers, if we have 10,000 workers and we have 1 fatality in 10,000, the fatalities per 100,000 would be 10 times that, so it'd be 10. Okay? Everybody clear on that? So, across all occupations combined, everything, all right? If you go to work, there's this rough number here that on average we're going to see 3.6 fatalities on the job per year, okay, per 100,000 workers going to work. Now, of course, that doesn't mean much because it really depends what occupation you go to. But overall, this is the kind of fatality rate we have at work. Okay, so now let's look at the stuff we really care about. In the commercial tower climbing world, interesting number, there's an estimated about 300,000 commercial towers for various purposes in the US. About a little more than 5,000 full-time equivalent workers. Is everybody familiar with the concept of full-time equivalent? So I didn't see everybody nod. So if I have 2 workers, one of them works, each of them is working 50% of the day, or 50% of their schedule. The 2 of them together equal 1 full-time equivalent. Okay? So it takes into account, this is a way of getting the part-time problem out of the equation. And by the way, there is a lot of part-time in this particular industry. There's probably something like 10 or 15,000 estimated workers, but full-time equivalent only 5,000 after you take the part-time out of the equation. Okay. The number of deaths, and this was again, all this data was collected and reported through that, through both the OSHA data and the additional investigation that those guys did on PBS and Frontline, okay? And it averaged over a 9-year period, 10 deaths per year. So when you normalize that, remember we only have 5,100 workers, so you got to get to the 100,000 level. It doesn't mean we're losing 199 a year, but in order to compare it to other things, 199 or roughly 200 per 100,000, right? Now, what's on the other side of this chart? Amateur tower climbing. And there's a lot going on in here, and I need to talk about that a little bit. In order to come up with this number, we got a number that's going to show up here. We had to come up with a model. How much tower climbing do we do, and how many? In order to do the fatality rate, we need to have fatalities, which we know, by the way. We have the 2. If we just start with the 2 that we talked about in the last year, but we have to divide by something, some full-time equivalent workers, 100,000 per 100,000 full-time equivalent workers. So how do we get to that? So we took an approach where we made an estimate of the number of amateur radio towers in the US. And you will ask, how do you come up with that number? Somebody asked. How do you come up with that? I'm glad you asked. I was racking my brains how to do this. And I was thinking about Sudbury. I live in Sudbury. I could go get a list of all the hams in Sudbury and run around and see how many of them had a tower in their yard. I thought that was a good idea. But then, then I realized that I needed to do, that was in a somewhat spread out suburban kind of area. What would the rate be? That would be a sample, but not a very good sample because it wouldn't represent the urban density of towers. So we had to come up with something else. So what we did was we came up with a model where we used Google Earth, right? And we wrote some software, and we also had a suspicion that the number of towers per ham would be higher for extra class hams than for generals and then for technicians. That was just a working theory, all right? So we took samples from each of those, and the software allowed us to enter a call sign in a field and immediately see a Google Earth view of that guy's location, okay? So it wasn't that hard to get a list from the FCC's ULS database, which has all the hams in the country. We took all the active hams in the country and we took a sample of a couple hundred extra class licensees, and they were spread out all over the place. Some of them were urban, suburban, so you saw apartment buildings, we saw everything there. And we came up with a percentage penetration for extra class and another percentage for general class and another percentage for technicians. And then we applied those to the total number of hams in all those groups, combined together, 38,000. So that's how we came up with that number. And then we made an estimate that it would took annually 24 hours of climber time per tower per year. All right, so most people what's your reaction to that? A full day of climbing time per tower per year?
That's a lot. I wouldn't have a tower if I had to spend 24 hours.
I've done more than that in some years.
Wow.
Right,
Person,
right.
Yeah. Wow.
Two people spending 2 day, a day in fall and a day in the spring.
Right.
Spending, 6 hours apiece working on a tower.
And that makes sense for an active situation, but there are so many towers out there that have just been up forever. And no one looks at them, and they're there, and they're in the mix too. Most people say that the average of 24 hours per tower per year is on the high side. Okay, it may well be. It's very low for me as well. Right. Okay. So we use that number. I think nobody would argue that number is too low, right? That's probably okay. All right. So when you multiply it out, we get 24 hours or 1 day per 38,000 towers. You get a number. We get 456 full-time equivalent workers, about 500. All right. And we had 2 fatalities in the last 12 months. There's the number when you normalize it to the 100,000. So it's twice as risky. As I did this research, I ran into more information about what was going on in our world. And it turns out that I got to move these 2 guys over to make room for 2 more in the same 12-month period. Okay. Ken Waddell, this I believe was in Tennessee. Ken Waddell, a father of 5, was a commercial tower climber who was assisting a ham radio friend in working on his tower. And the tower came down and he lost his life. This fellow here, Lee Parson, I think this was in Pennsylvania, I think. And he was just working on his own tower in the backyard. And I think he was alone. I'm not sure, but he was putting one up, and he came down with the tower as well.
Did the tower come down or did he come down?
Now, in this case, okay, so I've got to check on it. In this case, he came down with the tower, attached to the tower, and I think Ken may have fallen right off the tower, but I'm not sure. I'm going to have to check that for you. I have that information later in the presentation. Okay, so it wasn't 2. It was 4. And what happens to the numbers? Guess what? You know what happens to the numbers. They get worse. Okay? Okay, so commercial versus amateur tower climbing. With these assumptions, which I think, especially the 24, is kind of conservative, give us that kind of number for the last 12 months. Not good. And, oh, and by the way, the 199 number that we had there, that was considered extremely high. That was at the worst of the situation with the commercial tower climbers. They've brought that down since as a result of the uproar that came about as a result of the articles that Frontline did. Okay, so then I said, all right, commercial tower climb, fine, it seems unsafe. Let's look at something else people consider to be unsafe. So I found some numbers on skydiving. Okay, skydiving is pretty popular in the U.S. They count the number of jumps. So the number of jumps are tracked. The what's it called? The USPA, U.S. Parachute Association, is the group that handles all the safety-related stuff and tracking and all of this. They track the number of jumps and they track the number of fatalities. So 13 recorded fatalities in 2018 out of 3.3 million jumps. Okay, so if you normalize, I needed to do some normalizing here again. How many jumps per fatality is this number? 250,000 jumps, 1 fatality. Now, over in the amateur tower climbing world, we needed to do something similar to jumps. So we just took those 24 hours and broke it up into, said it was 4 climbs, 4 6-hour jobs. Okay, I don't know, maybe it's less or more, but it's in that range, not far. So, and again, we had the 4 deaths in the last 12 months. 1 climber fatality per 38,000 climbs. This is 7 times more likely than the fatality rate for the skydiving. Okay? So I think the message is coming clear that we do have a problem. The rate of fatalities that we have relative to the amount of climbing we do overall is too high. So that's the answer. Oh, we don't need to do. This is just another way of looking at the same data. So I answer the first question. The first question was, do we have a systemic problem? I think we do. So now we move into the second phase of the investigation, and we need to look at the data and try to understand whether there are any of those root causes that we could attack. All right. So one thing I wanted to understand, this is a little side trip here, how dangerous is it to work at height? You know, what are you likely to get hurt at what height? You know, things like that. I found a study that was done in New York City. It was done based on hospital records, emergency room records in a Bronx hospital, where they had information on falls and injuries, but they also knew how high the person fell from. Okay? So there were almost 200 cases that were available. The range in height that they fell from was 5 feet to 72 feet, and there were young people in here as well as older people. It turns out that this data is biased heavily towards under the age of 20. A lot of young, very young kids fall for different reasons, from windows and stuff. And that actually has an impact on the results. 28% of all of the 192, 54 died, okay, one way or another, after they were either immediately or they didn't make it through a treatment. 23%, so slightly less, never even made it into treatment. They were DOA on the ambulance or on site or when they arrived at the emergency room. Very important is that the severity of the injuries up to and including dying were directly correlated to the height that you fell from. So the higher you fall from, the worse off you are. Okay, let's go to this chart. This chart really makes things clear. Here's the height. A single floor, 2 floors, 3 floors, 4 floors. I think the number of feet per floor for this is 10 or 12 feet. I don't remember what they used for this. And then the percentage of mortality. And the one we want to look at is overall patients, which is right here, mortality and overall, this line right here. So here we've got 3.5 floors or 40 feet. So I think it's a 12-foot number that we're using. You had a 20% chance mortality. Okay. Only 15 feet higher, it goes to 50%. And of course, it gets worse from there. All right. We're going to talk about different types of falls in a minute. Paul asked the question about did the tower fall or did the person fall off the tower? And there are some differences that are important actually about that. Okay. This is another chart that talks about the severity of injuries. And basically all you need to know is this score, ISS, is called Injury Severity Score. It's a thing that the emergency room uses to actually rank how badly you're injured from when you come in. Okay, oh, you got a torso, 4 torsos and a skull fracture, and they add up to a score. And obviously it gets worse as the height increases. Okay, so we know that's a problem. Now let's look at what happened in our own history. It took a lot of digging. It was all internet research, trying to find all of the fatalities and some additional injuries that occurred in order to do some statistical kinds of analysis. And the best data we could find was from around the beginning of 2003 to 2019. This is a list of 14 fatal incidents, and it actually is 16 people. There was one incident where 3 people were killed in a single incident. Okay. We have information of the date, who, where, what type of tower. There were a few towers that I couldn't identify from the information that was available in the online articles and stuff. Most of them were guide. We have the concept of riding a tower, rode an unguided tower down. That's the falling attached to the tower. And then fell means you fell unrestrained from the tower to the ground. Okay? And then we have causes here, okay? And we're going to talk a lot about the causes. But it turns out there's a lot of commonality in causes. These are 5 additional data points that I added in here just to get the statistics to be a little more more numbers are better. More numbers are not better to have, but for the statistics, they're more helpful. These were serious injuries but did not result in a fatality. But the stories are almost the same. Okay, so now let's talk about what we got, some statistics. The types of towers that were involved, this green here is the unknowns. I actually suspect that at least 2 of these were guide towers. And so there were 13 of the incidents were with guide towers. Self-supporting and crank-up, very small number. And I have these unknowns, which I believe are probably guide towers. Now here are the types of things that actually happen. The biggest one, the red, is falling with the tower. That's the rode the tower down. The second big one here, the yellow, is free fall, falling off the tower without being restrained in some way. And then there's one that I called injured by the tower. That's sort of in the category that you were talking about. And this last one is electrocution. The next level of slicing I did was, I noticed that there was a lot of this happening when towers were being either installed or removed versus when they were being maintained. So 8 of the 19 total incidents were maintenance. What I mean is maintenance is somebody's climbing the tower to work on a feed line and put an antenna up to do something like that, not actually building the tower or taking the tower down. Okay? And these other 11 were all in that category, either building the tower itself or taking the tower down. The life of a tower, you think about the life of a tower, there's a lot more days and years that it's in this maintenance mode than in this construction mode. So already something's jumping out here at us, that the construction part of the life of the tower is suspect, right? Okay. Incidents by activity. So now we break down these two parts of the life of the tower. During installation or removal, what kind of incident occurred? So 9 out of 10 fell with the tower. So somebody was attached to the tower while the tower was being built or taken down, and they come down. Right? 1 was free fall during that process. And guess what? During maintenance work, it's all free fall. 1 injured, one injured by the tower. Okay. But when it was maintenance work, so in other words, when the tower's up and installed, the tower doesn't fall, whether you're on it or not. Okay. All right, root causes. I'm sorry, you able to see okay? All right. When you fall with the tower, when you ride the tower was in some sort of unsafe state. That's the only reason the tower was coming down, all right? I'll talk about the incident in New Hampshire where that 40-foot tower, the tower was not in a proper state for climbing. When it's free fall, it's about not using the right climbing technique or climbing equipment. PPE stands for personal protection equipment. Again, this is something we can take from the commercial world. They've been through this. The rules say you must wear XYZ, and XYZ equipment must meet certain specifications. And then finally, this is where the electrocution comes in, or other types of problems that we see, just doing stuff that's unsafe, doing things without the knowledge, without the right tools, without the right people, that kind of thing. So it's a sort of an overflow bucket of things. All right, root causes. So we look at all of these cases and break it down into the root causes. 9 of the, how many? 10, 19, 9 of the 19, climbing an unsafe tower. 7, not using the right equipment. And then I introduced this term here, free climbing, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And then these few others here are unsafe maneuvers. So now, in the amateur world, this is the chart by year. Okay, there was this one year, 2009, where there were 3 incidents. But it was kind of 1 a year, mostly here. In the last few years, it's climbed. And so that, this curve is going up. And so, and seeing 4, these 2 bars here were in a single 12-month period. We're not even all the way through 2019. So, this is going in the wrong direction. This second chart is a chart showing what went on in the commercial world. And around here, 2012 is when they did that study, or that whole thing, and a lot more regulation came out at that time. And so, if you look at generally here and generally here, it's down. And the point there is that I think there's some potential to do better. So, where we don't have anything going on right now, no active initiatives, they put some active initiatives in place, tightened up regulation and that kind of thing, and it seems to have made a difference. Okay, so my view is that we can fix this. We do now know root causes. Okay, we got root causes. We got the problem of not using the right equipment, personal protection equipment, and we've got the problem of towers being unsafe when we're climbing them. So I think we can do something with that, and I'll talk about that. I think we accomplished 2 things. We defined that we have a big problem, and second thing is we kind of got some data that leads towards root causes, but we're not quite there in the root causes, and we'll talk about this. So the 2 major ones, the 2 big ones, the unsafe tower climbing and the climbing without the personal protection equipment, are what I'm calling this deadly duo. Okay, climbing unsafe and without and free climbing. All right, now we're talking about the term free climbing. So let's talk about each of these separately. Climbing unsafe towers. I've added a word in here, knowingly. Okay, remember that when do these occur? When do these falling with the tower occur? During construction and during removal. So what do we do when we take down, and by the way, these were all, almost all guide towers, not self-supporting towers. So what do we do when we take down a tower? Anybody take down a tower? A guide tower?
Release the guy wire.
There's a point at which you need to take the guy wires off, right? And the way it usually works is, let's say there's 2 or 3 levels of guy wires, and you take off some sections, you remove some guy wires, you come down, you take off some more sections, and every time you might be up 20, 30 feet while you're taking off the highest section above the highest level of guy wires. Then you get down near the ground, okay? And you're using that same process. And at ground level, what you do, or the intuition about what to do, is it's got a base, it's only got to stay up for half an hour, you scamper up the tower, you tell your buddies to loosen them at the anchors, let them go, and then your plan is to remove the top section and take it down. You're 30 or 40 feet up in the air at this point. What happens is you've just removed what holds the tower up. The base doesn't hold the tower up in most cases. And in New Hampshire, the situation was they had there was a base plate. It was a tilt base plate. It was a hinged plate. Basically, the plate is somehow bolted to the concrete, but not very well. Usually, these are with a single bolt, 1 or 2 bolts, and then it kind of holds things up, sort of. But it's not intended to hold things up under any kind of load. But what they did was, I believe they released the guy wires down at the anchors, the last set of these guy wires, and there was 40 feet of tower up, and they trusted the base. And then they went up and started to take things apart. And when you're up there with a harness on and a belt around the tower, you're leaning back. And there were 2 people up there. And those stresses, those forces overcame the base's ability to keep the tower vertical. Now, after the fact, it was determined that there had been some corrosion at the base and the legs, that there's a thing that can happen where if the leg gets filled with water and it freezes, it can crack or, create a line fracture in the leg. So yes, that might have happened. But the truth is that had the tower been guyed, even with those fractures there, it would have stayed up long enough. So the thing that we're going to talk about is temporary guying. Okay, temporary guying is very important during the installation and removal process. So a very important principle is that a guide tower, any tower, needs to be in a state that is solid at all steps of the way, whether it's in construction or removal or in maintenance. And you do that by using temporary guys. So when you do have to remove guy wires from some permanent guys from some level, you take them off, but you don't take them off until there's another set of guy wires below that's holding the tower just as solidly as those permanent guys were holding. Okay? And it's very important to understand this concept of temporary guys doesn't mean poor guys, doesn't mean lousy guys. It really means steel guy wires that are properly attached to the tower, a section or 2 below, and going out to the anchors and using proper connections to the anchors and being tightened up to the tension that is supposed to be used for that tower. So what does that mean? It means that rope is no good. Regular stretchy rope. There are a good number of incidents in the data that we have, and some that I know about that didn't actually make it into this data, but where on field day or on a de-expedition, people raise a tower and they only have it up temporarily. The whole tower is temporary, and it's held up with ropes. And guess what? It comes down, and it may come down with somebody on it. That's happened. One of the fatalities in this data is a field day incident. Okay, so you get the point. I put it this way: if you're on the tower, you should be confident that the structure will withstand long-term stresses. So even during the construction and removal. Okay. All right, this is a tower that started at about 90 feet, and we took it down, it was in Framingham. And this slide is showing the tower when it was 40 or, I guess it's 40 feet left. A couple of feet of the tower was in concrete in the way this one was done. And then there were how many sections do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's 45 feet, something like that. And one set of guy wires. So what did we do? First thing we did was we brought in our own separate set of temporary guys. So these are steel guys, and we attached them just a little bit below, or right at the top of the 3rd section down. Okay, so there were 2 sections up above that were going to be unguyed after we removed these. So we removed these guys up here, and we replaced them, we put them down here. So now the tower is actually guyed more solidly now than it was when we started. We've got 2 sets of guys in the middle, but we got a little, you know, we got two sections up above. So we take off these two sections, and now the thing still has two sets of guy wires on it. We remove the upper ones, then we remove this section, and then guess what? Here, over here, we loosened these guy wires at the anchors. I didn't actually say that here. We didn't remove them from the tower. We're not on the tower now. Nobody's on the tower. We loosened them out at the guy anchor, at the anchor points, and we removed this one section because it was reachable from the ground. And actually, no, hang on, that's not what we did. I'm sorry. I forgot. This is not correct. What we did here, you may see inside this tower there's a pipe. There's a mast. We lowered the mast, big 20-foot mast inside the tower. We used a Sawzall, and we cut this off at the base with the 5 feet that was exposed from the bottom section plus the 10 foot above. We just let it fall. So there's nobody on the tower at that point. So we were never on the tower when it was not guyed. So that process worked. Now that process took extra time because we had to set and move guy wires, but that's the cost. All right, so you get the point should be clear. A lot of these accidents happened, a large number, all of these ride the tower down things happened when people were putting up a tower or taking it down and they didn't have it properly guyed during the construction or removal process. That's the important point. And the solution to that is real good temporary guys. Okay. Free climbing. So who knows what free climbing is? Okay. Free climbing is, you know, this is the kind of, anecdotal story, you know, what you think of in your mind of free climbing is this very risky behavior of not being attached at all, not wearing any equipment at all. But actually, OSHA and the standards people and people who regulate this in the working at height business call free climbing any moment that you are not securely, properly attached to the thing you're climbing. And that's important. So if you climb with all the right equipment on, and at a certain time you don't use the equipment properly and you're not actually attached for a moment, that has been, your climb has been classified as a free climb. Okay. All right, so here's a guy. I just pulled this video off the internet. All right, so here's a fellow, and this doesn't look too old. This is probably only a couple of years old. Some ham, and I don't know if you can hear in the speaker there, his buddies are on the ground egging him on.
Now, is this
Go.
adult rated? Is we gonna see him fall?
No, we are not going to see him fall. No, it's just you know, not very cavalier attitude. That's the point. Okay. Okay. And I have some pictures of other kinds of free climbing happening. So this guy, I don't think he's properly attached. He's wearing really a tool belt there. This guy here looks like he's not attached at all. He's not wearing any kind of thing. All he's wearing is this tool bucket. And he went up to help the guy up here in the bucket, you know, with some tools, or moving the antenna to the right place. Here's field day. This guy's swinging his lanyard around. He's not attached. And notice these are ropes. Okay. Here's another field day, more ropes, and a guy who scampers up here to attach the antenna. I don't know, what are these guys doing? This is all, I mean, this is probably all familiar to you. I've seen, we've all been at field day like this. This is not, okay, and our attitude needs to change, basically. All right, I will tell you in a minute about de-expeditions. The expedition world has changed. That guy right there, that's me in my pre-safety days. All right, I am not properly attached. This thing here is called a positioning lanyard. And a positioning lanyard doesn't actually attach you to the tower. It slips up and down around the outside of the tower. Now, it's true, it's true. If I fell right now, I probably wouldn't fall any further than the ring rotor, right? But it's not safe. If I was below the ring rotor, I could fall 30 feet, 20 feet to the first set of guy wires I hit, and that wouldn't be very comfortable. Right here, I have the means to be 100% attached. These little ropes here have clips. Those should be attached, and I didn't have them attached while I was waving at whoever was taking the picture. Okay. Now, this is the show and tell time. All right. This is a near replica of the climbing belt that I first used when I was 12 or 13 and helping out people. A friend would have one of these. Everybody know what this is? What is this? This is a telephone lineman's belt. Okay. Note it's a belt. It's called a belt. It's not called a safety harness or anything like that. It isn't a safety device. When you climb with this thing, you would have a few tools in these loops here. You would let this thing hang, and you would climb up those pegs on the side of the pole. And when you get to the spot where you want to work, you swing this thing around, you catch it with your other hand, and you clip it on this ring. Okay, this was outlawed by OSHA many years ago. I don't know how many. There are a ton of these still being used by hams. This was, you remember that tower that we took down? The guy who we took it down for said, "Hey Jim, I've got a really, really nice climbing belt. I only want $30 for it." It was this. Okay, I said, "I will take that off your hands. I will not pay any money for it, but I'm going to use it for my talk." Okay, so OSHA says that's no good. Why? Because it's not safety. Another reason is made out of leather. Leather isn't a controlled manufacturing process. You don't actually know if this has the strength to be relied upon. Okay, the next belt that I got, which I climbed, this is the one you saw me wearing in that last slide. So this is a waist harness, belt kind of thing. It has an additional feature, which is these leg straps. Okay, now if you fall with that thing on, that one that we were just looking at, and you're a skinny guy, you could actually slip right out of that thing. And it happens. Okay, this prevents that. So this is an improvement over that. These leg things go around the legs, and if you fall, you're actually going to be held up by this rope here. This is at your belly button. Okay, you're attached on here. Now you asked about two points of attachment. You don't have to be attached with both of them at the same time, but you can't be 100% attached unless you have two. That's the secret. Okay, so when I climbed with this thing, I would hook this onto a rung and climb up a couple more rungs, and then I'd hook this guy up a little higher and remove this one and go up like this. So it's alternating up like this. This thing was OSHA approved until, I don't know, some years ago, but because what they came up with is the concept of a full body harness rather than just a waist harness. So this thing became no longer approved. This again was better than that because it was made out of materials that were, testable, tensile, the strength of the strapping and everything was pretty well guaranteed. Okay. Okay, so now we move to current day approved equipment, personal protection equipment. This thing is called a full body harness. It's made by a manufacturer called DBI Sala. They're a division of 3M. The way this thing works is this stuff goes over your shoulders, these two here, and there's a strap that goes down all the way down here, and there's the leg thing again. So this strap here connects into here. This is how you put this thing on. Whoops, you don't do it with that inside. Varies. You can get a less expensive one than this for a couple $100. and the most expensive ones are $1,000. They're correct. How much is your life worth? Exactly. There are some interesting features on here. It's designed, you're supposed to throw it away after you fall. If you have a fall in this thing, you're supposed to throw it away. And there are some indicators for falls. There's this, see this little, there's some stitching right here. It just has a little overlap. If there was a fall, this would tear probably, and you get rid of the thing, the whole thing. You replace it.
That's something I find that people don't appreciate, is that ropes and such have a lifetime.
Mhm.
And it's not just number of falls, it's just the number of years that the rope has been around.
Well, that's true. So in the commercial world, they do specify that you're supposed to get rid of it no matter what after 5 years. And we have to think about that. People, hams aren't climbing every day for their job, and if you have a good piece of equipment, do you really need to throw it away after 5 years? I can talk to you about the skydiving world. In the skydiving world, there are inspectors who look at parachute equipment and they recertify it, and they will recertify it as long as it passes the inspections. And it's not government regulated. That group that I told you about before, the U.S. Parachute Association, certifies inspectors and riggers who do all the packing of the chutes and everything, and they will certify your equipment, or their equipment, whatever it is. Okay. So this is the thing you wear, and so it's over the shoulder and around the legs, and it has the positioning belt. The belt is actually not considered part of the safety design. The safety design is all about the strapping that goes around the weight-bearing part of the design. Now, you still have to be attached. We haven't done any attachment with this yet. This is the thing that does the attachment. This is called a dual fall arrest lanyard. Okay? It attaches up at the top. So this D-ring here would be on your back. All right, and you attach this thing like that, and as you climb, I should just put the thing on, shouldn't I? Okay. All right. So.
How is this different than what, say, a rock climber would buy at a place like REI?
A lot of the companies that make the rock climbing gear make these too. They're in the same business. That one right, the yellow one, the one I showed you a minute ago, is made by a rock climbing company. And I'll give you my fee schedule. Okay. Okay, so there we go. So this thing is on now. And normally you climb with one of these over each shoulder. And you can see they have bungee. The bungee has nothing to do with falling. The bungee is just makes it more convenient to work with. It instead of hanging at full length.
Actually,
Yeah.
the bungee is the indicator that you've used.
It's, it can be.
That bungee goes bye-bye.
Yeah, okay. Up here, yeah, it's tight in here, yeah.
Are those sewn?
What's that? Yes, the inside is sewn, and when you fall, it tears.
The ribs?
And there is actually a tear indicator somewhere on here. We can look at it afterwards.
The accordion itself is an indicator.
Right.
Every time you fall on that indicator straightens out.
Yeah.
And it will never.
Oh, right, that's right. That's correct. Yeah, you're right. So again, here we're climbing and we're alternating, and you always have one of these hooked on.
So what arrests the fall is actually all those stitches that are buried behind that bungee.
That's right. Yep, that's correct. Okay. And then the last thing is, this is a positioning thing. This goes around the tower, and you connect over here. That's it's a work positioning thing. And this one is kind of cool because it's adjustable. So sometimes you want to be real uptight, and sometimes you want to be leaning further back. Yeah?
So is
your advice to all of us who have old climbing belts to put them in the car?
Yes, yes,
Wow.
exactly. Yes, absolutely. I was going to say that.
Get rid of them.
Yeah, if you have those things, just, commit not to using them or get rid of them or whatever. You should get rid of them. And really, one person, when I gave her this talk another time, said, I'm getting rid of it and I'm going to cut it up so that nobody else can use it. Okay.
Where do you get that?
What's that?
Where do you get your wood?
I bought this, well, actually, this one I bought from a friend locally. I bought that new online. Everything's available online. Amazon does it all. Okay, all right.
They do come in different weights.
So this slide, attachment, it's only possible with the right equipment, full body harness, and the dual fall arrest. 100%, okay, is not a guideline. It's required. So when you're up there thinking, you need to be thinking about this and every step. It's not hard, and I've had the situation come up when I've been on a tower. I accidentally remove or think I'm going to remove the one that's hooked on and move it up, but you can't do that. You got to go grab the other one and move it above. Sometimes I get some comments about OSHA has all these rules, but they don't really apply to us when we work in our backyard, and it's true. They're not mandatory for you as a homeowner. Working on your own stuff. If you get paid for the work, you're now officially under OSHA rules. And then there's the ANSI stuff, which is recommended. But did you know that there is a set of laws that does apply equally to commercial tower climbers and amateur tower climbers in their backyard? And does anybody know what laws those are? You're on the right track. I call Newton's laws. Newton's laws. Okay. And the point is to be, that should be enough motivation to do the right thing. Okay. All right. Here. Okay. This is me on my tower. I'm here. I'm at about 60 feet here. And let's see if this works.
What are you doing?
Well, all I'm I'm doing a demo of climbing, and I've got this contraption here. This antenna and there's guy wires here attached, and the positioning harness you'll see is below the guy wires, and I've just put one of the attachment things up above high. Okay, and I just let the positioning harness go because I can't get it up past the guy wires any other way, but I'm attached. And I'm attached actually on two spots. And here I'm moving one of these guys up now. And I've got a lot of hardware to get around here. I've got to get past this, and then I got to get past this thing here. Can you see that okay? Now, this tower there's another Yagi down below here, and there are 3 more side-mounted up above, and there's a repeater antenna on the side, and then if you get up to the top, there's the 40-meter Yagi on a ring rotor, and there's guy wires. So every time you have to move, you got to go through this process, and it's slow. It takes a significant amount of time to move around on the tower. Okay, so we have talked about 2 big things. We talked about the temporary guying, the problem of guide towers falling with a person attached, and we've talked about how to prevent free fall. The last thing is this concept of unsafe maneuvers, and you recognized already the electrocution being one of those. Here are 2 stories real quick. One is, here's what was going on. There was a little project going on. A few people were at a house, and they were tilting some sort of antenna support. I don't know exactly what it was. I'm calling it a tower, up at the base, and it was going to be bracketed to the side of the house. So there was somebody, it was going to be bracketed. A few people were raising this, and one person was on the roof to kind of catch it and pull it in. Okay, and guess what happened here? This was the electrocution. So this thing, instead of going up to the going up where it was intended, it tipped and it hit power lines, and these people died. And they were all members of the same family. The second one I'll tell you about was a little different. In this case, they were removing a big 40-meter Yagi. It was a big antenna, over 300-pound antenna. And I think, okay, it was a 100-foot tower. One guy is up on the tower, and he had a couple of ground crew. And the tools, I got the sense from reading it that they didn't have fancy rigging to do this job. And what happened was the antenna fell. I mean, I'm sure he was trying to do his best, but he lost it up there, and it fell on one of the upper guy wires, and the tension of the two other guy wires pulled the top of the tower over, and it folded, and he was on it, and the whole thing came down. Okay. So, and I'm sure that there are other examples of this kind of thing. You can't classify all these things together, but the only thing we can say on this kind of thing is you gotta recognize the size of the job. You gotta have the skills. If you don't know, and then there's always the question of what do I know what I don't know, and that's a hard one for people. All right. Okay, so now we get into this whole idea of training. Where and how can we attack the problem? A lot of it, I think there are two categories of problems. One is awareness and training and all that category, education. The other is also reducing barriers. So for example, how does every climber make sure that how do we make sure that every climber has access to this equipment? Somehow, right? If you're going to climb, it should be easy for you to have something that's adequate to do that job. So we need to figure out a way to get these things into people's hands, or at least give them the option to buy it. And of course, we have to convince them that the $300 or $500 spent there before it's spent on a rotator is worthwhile doing. All right? But you're right, we can't convince every single person of that. But if we can do well. I think we can do pretty well at this. I believe actually that a large percentage can be covered just by the education, that people have that they will have an open mind and accept. One second, Art. I've divided our audience into three categories. One is, I call them the simply unaware. They just don't know. As soon as they figure it out and understand, they'll run out and buy all the stuff and do it all right. The second is the sort of unmotivated. And that's where the barriers come in. Oh, it's going to cost me too much. I don't know where to look for it. So they never get around to it. So you lower the barriers for those people. Then the third category I call, what do they call them? The invincible. Okay, you've met some of those? The invincible are those who just think the rules that the Newton's laws don't apply to them, or whatever. And those people, we have to deal with them too, because it's not, this problem is not just a reflection on the individual who suffers directly. It's a reflection on the whole community. Okay? If we have people doing things wrong and losing their lives, they are a statistic, and our whole community might be judged on that statistic. And I don't want to be judged on your bad decision. So we need to figure out even ways to get those people in the boat. So I talk about individual level. So just you knowing about this stuff, Tom just said, if you have one of these belts, don't use it anymore, make that, get rid of it, upgrade, whatever. I mean, I did that. I stopped climbing until I got my hands on one of these new ones. And so there was a period of time that I didn't do any maintenance on my tower. And I talk about local and regional clubs. This idea of a mindset or a culture is important. And there are a couple of parts to that. One part is just knowing these things. Think ahead, be patient, be aware, responsible. But it's more than that, because the culture has to change to accept that these things have a higher priority than getting the job done today, for example. If if it's getting to be 4 in the afternoon and it's no longer daylight savings time and it's getting dark and windy and cold and the job isn't done, what decision do you make? You know, the decision is probably at 3:30 that you climb down slowly, following the procedures. You put the tools away, and you continue at the right time. But there are a lot of people who might not make that decision. So this balance of accepting these costs of having a safety culture have to be learned, and they have to be considered by all of us to be of value. If we laugh at somebody who comes down and makes that decision, we're not doing anybody any favors. Okay, let's see. All right, so me, my story. So this was the picture of me a year ago, a year and a half ago. Now I've got the gear on. You know, it.
Got a helmet on there too, yeah?
Yeah, my helmet is not acceptable. This helmet's no good. This should go in the pile too. It needs to have a chin strap. Okay. So that's got to go. I got to get it. That's a $60 investment. But I'm fully attached. You know, I've got my the hard attach going around the leg of the tower. I'm not fully dependent on the positioning lanyard for this job. The dollar cost was a few $100, but the real more difficult cost to accept is this kind of stuff. 3 times as long to climb up and down the tower. 3 times as long to just move from one spot to another. And that's the moment that you hurt yourself. That's the moment. Okay, when you get to, if I was wearing my old stuff, the minute I get to the place where the work is going on and I'm strapped in and things are attached okay, nothing's going to happen. That's pretty safe. The moment I have to move, climbing, I got to tell you something, climbing from underneath that stuff to above that stuff, there's a little bit of acrobatics involved in that. Groups, okay, local groups. So clubs, so there's things that we can pool together as a club, right? Expertise is a big one. Just, you know, person power, having people available to come and help. And then there's tools, you know, the ability to share tools. So all of these things, and it's smart to, you know, we can share costs. So we can have a couple of belts that the club owns that we can loan out for this kind of work. One thing that we put together is this thing, Mark Pride, K1RX, came up with this, which is a kit. And we've kind of got one of these kits together for the Yankee Clipper Contest Club. It's a set of guy cables and come-alongs and the attachment hardware and all the things you need for that one set of extra temporary guys. So we can loan that out. So at the national level, there are opportunities for national organizations. You know who our primary national organization is. The ARRL could have a role here, but maybe others as well. To kind of be a centralized repository for information and training and to get the message out. And it will take some investment to do that. Art, that was real smart. The NCVEC, the National Council of VE Coordinators, creates the question pool. Well, there are just 2 questions in the entire pool for all license levels right now that have anything to do with safety. There are other topics that are much more esoteric and less relevant to almost any ham that have a lot more questions. I think that the basics of safety are probably a pretty high priority and should have some questions, and especially right in the most, in the level. Element. What's the technician element? 2. Element 2. So we're getting to the end. Summary. We definitely have a problem and we need to act. I think we've got these, 3 primary root causes, of which there's the deadly duo are really the ones that we want to attack. I think we kind of know what is at, what approaches we can take to solve the problem. And finally, this idea of creating a culture that accepts this and values safety as a high priority is very important. So then I ask the last question, which is, you know, individual level is important. I would hope that whether you are, when we started this thing, I asked you if you were a tower owner or a climber or a ground crew. I'm sure that there's something you can take from this, no matter which of those roles you have, and do better the next time you're involved in one of these projects. That's the end. I had a lot of help putting this together from tower climbers and software developers and all kinds of people. And this list keeps growing because I get a lot of positive feedback and good suggestions from others. So thank you. Good.